welcome to the ICANN APAC-TWNIC Engagement Forum. This is the second day section. We would like to remind you that please turn your mobile phone to the silent mode. And this session will be live streamed and recorded. If you need, you can check our website for further information. And now, please welcome our CEO of TWNIC, Kenny Huang, to give us a brief speech and introduction to our keynote speakers today.
Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is my honor to introduce today's keynote speaker. The first keynote speaker delivered by Paul Wilson, Director General of APNIC, and the second one will be David Conroe, CTO of ICANN. So let's welcome Paul Wilson to give the first speech.
Thank you, Kenny. Thanks everyone. Okay. So I don't have I don't have a screen in front of me. I'll need to be looking at this screen a little bit. I'm going to be talking this morning about one of our future, now today, registry services. I mean, the APNIC IP address registry has been running for about 25 years. And of course, the idea of the registry is to tell everyone, the internet public, about who has got control of, who holds the IP addresses that APNIC manages. And that's, I think we all know that's very important for fault finding, for engineering, for network configuration, for security, increasingly these days for people outside our traditional community like law enforcement and public safety and so on, these people to be able to track down the users of IP addresses, which are the subject of the APNIC registry. But that registry has been based on WHOIS for about 25 years, and WHOIS was designed in the early 1980s, so it's a very old standard, and it's got serious limitations in terms of being able to be used for different, particularly automated applications. So one of the new registry services which APNIC and the other RIRs is working on is called RPKI, or Resource Public Key Infrastructure. Now, I've spoken about this last year here in Taipei, so I'm going to be giving a technical introduction to RPKI for those who may need that, and also an update on a lot of the actually quite recent developments and changes which have been happening, which show you that RPKI is not really the next generation. It's really happening here and now today, and it's something that we all need to take a look at. So what is RPKI? It's a PKI, a public key infrastructure for internet resource numbers. That's about creating a cryptographically verifiable system of recording the ownership, or those who are holding IP addresses and autonomous system numbers, and it's creating mechanisms in particular for routing security. So this is what I'm going to be talking about, but I wanted to just make one brief, let's see if I can get this to work. But first, turn the switch. First, congratulations to TWNIC. This is a graph of IPv6 growth in Taiwan. It's congratulations to TWNIC and to all of Taiwan for this quite incredible rise in IPv6. APNIC has spent quite a lot of time in recent years talking about IPv6 around the region and encouraging deployment. And this is exactly what we have been dreaming of seeing in different economies of the region. So starting just in early 2018, there's this beautiful curve, very rapid and straight line increase in IPv6 deployment. So Taiwan now is at above 30%. It puts this part of the world in the top 10, definitely, of IPv6 deployment around the world. There's something else that's quite useful to take a look at. I'm still trying to work this magic wand here. if we drill down and look at what's happening in Taiwan, this one it goes backwards, it doesn't really go forwards. Not very easily. If we drill down and look at what's happening in Taiwan, we see that it's not just one or two ISPs, but actually all of the large providers are providing some very respectable IPv6 capabilities. So HiNet is at 20% now. EMOM is the leader at 77%. Taiwan Mobile, Far East Telecommunications. There's a couple of others highlighted there, which are smaller networks, but still respectable, Ambit and Tarnet. So I just wanted to mention that again, because you might have expected APNIC to be talking once again about IPv6. We do that quite often. Congratulations. But back to the agenda. RPKI. So it's a PKI. It's based on the X509 digital certificate standards for public-private key security. It's the same standard that's used in SMIME and HTTPS. So this is a technology that we use quite often without necessarily knowing it very well. But it's been adapted so that RPKI certificates are X509 certificates which carry the details of the IPv4, IPv6 and ASN resources which are held by the certificate holder. So if you hold this certificate, the private key to this certificate, then it verifies that you are the owner, the holder of the IP resources which are documented in the certificate. So you will receive these certificates with your resource allocations from the IP address registry, from APNIC, from TWNIC. And in that sense, the IP address registry, the RIR, the NIR, is the certificate authority for issuing these certificates. The second part of RPKI is not just the holding of the certificates which show that you have authority for the resources, but also the ability to authorize routing. So there's something called a route origin authorization, a ROA object. That's something that you as a certificate holder produce and you sign it, and it gives you the ability to authorize your addresses to be routed from a particular autonomous system. Now I'm going backwards again. I would recommend replacing this device for the next speaker. RPKI has got several defined objects. Those resource certificates, as I mentioned, which are issued by the Internet Registry, is the CA, the route origin authorization, which I described as well. There's a third object, actually something that's been proposed through APNIC, which is the resource tagged attestation, the RTA, which is something that actually allows you to sign any object, such as a letter, with your digital certificate and having your resources attached to that. So you could have a letter of authority, for instance, posted or given to your upstream ISP or your peer that carries your resources as part of your request to them to route IP addresses. Now, I'm sure we all basically know about internet routing, but if we have an autonomous system which has a block of IP addresses, IPv4 in this case, if that autonomous system, if that network is to have its address space routed on the internet, it needs to get those addresses into the global routing tables of the internet in some way. And that's done through announcing the addresses, after which the addresses appear in the routing table. And from that point on, the traffic can flow between the internet and your autonomous system. The thing about this rather now dated system of internet routing using BGP is that the mechanism for getting that route into the routing table is not well defined. So there's kind of a question mark as to how your upstream or your peer actually understands that you really do have the right to use those addresses and therefore to receive and to source the traffic. So in fact, kind of that system, which has got an informal set of informal mechanisms for validation, really do raise question marks over the origin of and the destination of traffic on the internet routed in this manner. Now, these are not very common security breaches, but there have been, over the recent years, a series of quite serious routing security breaches which are caused exactly by the fact that routing to the wrong address block can actually happen fairly readily on the internet. So Facebook had a major outage of all of its applications back in March of just this year, just a couple of months ago. Google in 2018 also had a major routing outage, a BGP leak involving a particular autonomous system out of Nigeria and out of China Telecom. There is quite a list, but these are big players who've been affected by routing outages. Amazon, Google. Way back in February 2008 was the first major instance we had where Pakistan Telecom announced some YouTube address space, and that announcement propagated quite widely in the internet at the time, taking YouTube down for much of the internet for quite a period of time. So the routing security is something that actually has been an issue that definitely needs attention. RPKI is the mechanism that we have been developing over some years to assist with that. So how does it work? Well, with the use of a ROA, a Route Origin Authorization, that ROA can be provided with your routing announcement to your upstream. So rather than using a letter of authority or a telephone call to someone to say, please believe me, I am who I am, and please route my address space, or providing just a written letter that could be on letterhead, but it's still something that can be forged, that letter of authority can be replaced by a ROA, and that's the digitally signed object that actually you can only produce this ROA if you are the holder, the genuine holder of those IP addresses. And so with that ROA, providing the authorization for you to originate the address space that you're using, everyone can be happy. The traffic, at least between your upstream and your autonomous system, can be more trusted. So just in a little more detail, this ROA is a signed object. It's an object which lists the prefixes which a particular autonomous system number is authorized to announce, and it's signed by the resource holder with their RPKI certificate. It provides not only the prefix or prefixes and the origin AS that is authorized, but it gives a maximum length. So that's a constraint on the number of the length of the prefix within your block, which is also authorized to be announced by that autonomous system. So the systems which are tied up with the whole RPKI framework then actually validate the integrity of the route origin authorization of the ROA, and they need to check whether the ROA was signed genuinely, correctly by the holder of the prefixes using a valid RPKI certificate. And if that's the case, then we can now use that routing announcement which complies with this ROA in the routing system. Part of that process is the RPKI validator. So the validator is a server which is gathering and validating ROAs from a set of RPKI databases. Now those databases are located with the RIRs, the NIRs, and with IANA as the top-level IP address registry. Those databases are accessed via the what's called the RPKI router Delta protocol. That validator accesses those databases. It assembles a cache of validated ROAs, and it can then perform route origin validation based on that cache of ROAs on behalf of routers which query it. When a router queries that RPKI validation system, they will receive a result for a given route which says that that route within the RPKI is either unknown or not found within the RPKI system, and that would be happening in the majority of cases now, because as RPKI is rolled out, we only have a minority of address space actually covered by ROAs. But so what it means is that ROA is not yet found in the RPKI system. There's really no difference between not found and not even using RPKI at all. So we can ignore that as the default. The validator can also return a valid status, which actually means that the rower for your IP address block exists. The prefix, the origin AS, and the length match those in the validated cache. And so that will be a valid and validated route, which under the RPKI framework can be more trusted than otherwise. You could also get an invalid routing state, which means that a rower exists. This is address space or a route which is in theory certified, but there's some error. So this could be an attempt at squatting or spoofing, faking a BGP announcement, or it could be simply an error, what we call a fat finger error, where someone has typed the wrong IP address space into their router, and that's more common than you would think. So in that case, if the RPKI is telling you that a route is invalid, then you would want to take some action on that. Now, at the moment, you'd want to take action quite carefully on invalid routes, because the RPKI is a new system and it's still being sort of bedded in, if you like. But if you were to get an invalid route, if you're seeing that for an inbound route from upstreams or peers, then you'd probably want to, well, you may want to drop that route, you may want to give it a lower local preference, or you may want to do nothing. In the case of outbound routes to customers, you could, under the way the framework is evolving, you could tag those routes before redistributing them to your customers to allow your customers to make their own choices on those routes. Or you could, or as I said, you could tag them, for instance, at an IXP, so that, for instance, a community tag could be applied based on the validation status of not found valid and invalid. That also, again, allows your customers or peers to make choices about what to do with those invalid routes. So in the case of border routers, if you have an ISP with a number of border routers, then those border routers are simply talking directly to the validator to determine whether routes they've heard should be filtered or accepted or not, and that is a point-to-point communication between each of your border routers and a validator accessing the validated ROV cache. One interesting application that's being rolled out right now quite effectively is at IXPs, where across the IXP switch, it is possible to implement route origin validation to simply ensure that the routes that are being shared by peers at the IXP are intact and valid. So in this case, and this is something that has been implemented in quite a few cases already, if an ISP wants to announce a route across the exchange, then that will go to the route server, and the route server can also talk to the validator to make sure that the announcement that it's heard can be validated, and then it will redistribute the routing announcement with tags or filters to improve the reliability of routing across the exchange. Okay, so that's the basic sort of function and application of RPKI. As I said at the start, this is something that's a transition of the routing system into a new, more robust and validated framework. It's actually being deployed pretty actively at the moment, so it's really worth keeping an eye on who is actually implementing RPKI and what they're requiring, for instance, of customers and peers, and what are your opportunities if you're involved with an ISP, or if you're a network operator, what are your opportunities to implement RPKI and to take advantage of it. So there's quite a lot of data collection going on at the moment across the internet as well of how much deployment there is. And there's an RPKI monitor here at NIST.gov, which is a publicly accessible service. And it's looking at the RPKI status across the total routing system, looking, as it says here, at 811,955 unique routes, and looking at the RPKI status of them. And the interesting thing is there's very close to 13%, this was last week, very close to 13% of all routes which are surveyed here have actually got valid RPKI rowers attached to them. So that's really a pretty good record. I mean, we've got a long way to go, but 13% effectively of that number of routes does indicate a high level of deployment already. The number of invalid routes is quite small. It's 0.75%. Now, as I said before, that could be in relation to either nefarious malicious activity in trying to hijack routes or to pollute the routing system. It could be due to errors made by operators in incorrectly configuring routing, or it could actually be in relation to misuse of the RPKI. So it might be, it's probably not, wouldn't be valid to assume that nearly 1% of all routes in the routing system are invalid, but that's how they're appearing at the moment. So if you were dealing with those routes, you'd want to take some notice of what, of falsely flagged. And we've got 86% or so of the routing system still not yet certified or validated under RPKI, but that's something that is changing quite rapidly. If we look at the regional status, we've got across the economies, and this is a sampling of the economies that APNIC serves, we've got some interesting progress being made. We've got anything up to, well, the chart shows a little hard to read, but the first black bar for each economy is the percentage of organizations that we deal with as APNIC members, for instance, that actually are using RPKI and have registered ROAs. The blue bar is the percentage of IPv6 address space in that economy that is under ROAs, and the green is the blue is IPv4, the green is the percentage of IPv6 address space. So perhaps the best example here is, well, the best examples are, in fact, Sri Lanka, Singapore, and Taiwan. So Taiwan shows just over 20% of organizations in the RPKI being actually participating in the RPKI, having certificates and ROAs. But that actually accounts for over 90% of IPv6 address space in Taiwan. It accounts for nearly 70% of IPv4 address space, and that's those numbers are very good. On the other hand, Sri Lanka has got 60% of its community participating in the RPKI. That's a much smaller community, mind you, so it's probably a smaller number of actual individual operators. They've reached over 90% of IPv4, but less than 60% of IPv6. And as you see, there are some economies listed here, mainland China, Hong Kong, Indonesia, India, Vietnam, for instance, that are yet to do very much at all. But I think you can see quite a healthy uptake of RPKI across the Asia-Pacific region already, according to these figures. And that's good to see. So there you are, Taiwan. Another thing for the Taiwanese internet community to be proud of in this case. So that's nice to see. So a few more details here about RPKI adoption, and there have been quite a few major announcements. So NTT America is now recognizing ROAs as of July last year, so BGP customers can register their ROAs and use those and have them available to NTT for validating those routes. NLnet Labs in the Netherlands has created a public domain and open source RPKI validator, which is a small and portable implementation as of mid last year. It's also producing analytics similar to the ones that I've shown here about RPKI adoption globally. Cloudflare, as we know, a very large content provider, has announced the use of route origin validation at its 150 points of interconnect as of September last year. So if you're wanting to interconnect with Cloudflare, then they are asking you to register your route origin authorizations in order to do that. Cloudflare has also been producing some very useful RPKI systems implementations, what we call relying party software and server implementations. There are URLs given in these details here for anyone who wants more information. I don't expect you to sort of memorize those, but I'm sure the presentation materials can be made available if you'd like to follow up. Moving right along, Amazon Web Services is now requiring the use of ROAs by customers who are using the BYOIP service as of November last year. So if you're connecting to Amazon with your own IP addresses, then they are asking you or requiring you to have those addresses in the RPKI and to have ROAs lodged for those in order to interconnect with Amazon. So that's a very strong statement of support and requirement by Amazon, again, to ensure that their routing system is not receiving and propagating incorrect routes. OpenBSD has announced RPKO clients to be in future distributions of their software and their BGP daemon BGPD. Again, NLNet Labs has software which, this is important, this is the Krill RPKI server which is being developed. And this is what allows you as a downstream IP address recipient from, say, APNIC or TWNIC to run your own RPKI certification authority. So if you're a large ISP and you're distributing IP addresses in blocks to downstream ISPs, then in fact you may wish to be serving as a certification authority for that address space and issuing those IP addresses. APNIC offers a service which allows you to do that, but this development from NLNet Labs will allow you to do it yourself if that's how you wish to work. KPN in the Netherlands is also implemented and announced RPKI for their customers and smaller peers. APNIC, along with other RIRs, has been very active thanks to Jeff Houston, George Michelson and others at APNIC. They've been actively involved with the standardization service, the standardization process. RFC 8369 has recently been approved. That refers to validation reconsidered, which is an adjustment to the validation algorithms of RPKI to improve their effectiveness. There's something else called the resource tagged attestation, which I mentioned has gone to the IETF as a draft. And that's that ability, as I said, to be signing with your resources an attestation, a statement such as a letter of authority. ZDNS in Beijing is maintaining the RP-STIR relying party software. That includes something called SLRM, which is support for the use of local trust anchors within the RPKI system. And that supports the APNIC proposed validation reconsidered. So the point here is that there's a lot going on RPKI around the world, and it's something that can improve your routing. It's something that can be required of you in interconnection as well. And finally, on IXPs, there are quite a few IXPs that are implementing RPKI across the router, across the switch, to ensure that that routes exchanged over the IXP are more reliable. That goes back all the way to Japan in October 2014. They implemented it at JPNAP at Multifeed. Interestingly, CRIX in Costa Rica back in 2015. And I give credit to APNIC's peer registry, LACNIC, for having done a huge amount of work on promoting RPKI in the Latin America region. Also AM6, also BKNICS, Links in Manchester, DEKICS, and probably quite a few other IXPs are implementing ROV. I'm sorry if it's being implemented by any of the Taiwan IXPs. I don't have that information, but I'd be very interested to know if that is happening. Okay, so just to summarize, the whole point of RPKI is to improve the validation of your resource holdings. That used to be possible only by having records in the WHOIS database, which really isn't good enough from a security point of view, and certainly not for automation or for cryptographic security. Much safer than WHOIS, and it's also something that can be automated, as you've seen in some of these systems that I've described here. The idea is improving the security of the routing system to stop either route hijacks polluting the routing system, to stop errors from being propagated through the routing system and causing potentially very serious problems globally across internet routing. So this is route origin validation. You might notice this is about the validation of route origins. We're not talking yet about an implementation of BGP path validation, but that's something that's under development for those who are interested in that. Deployment is accelerating. Global IPv4 coverage of around 13% and growing. There are software and vendor implementations, and there are plenty of IXPs, CDNs, and Tier 1 networks who are now deploying or announcing. So if you're interested in participating, where do you start? Well, APNIC has got this charming campaign called Ready to ROA. So if you're ready to create your ROAs for your IP address holdings held at APNIC, you can, as an APNIC member, you could use My APNIC. TWNIC as well, of course, we're working closely with TWNIC on implementation here. If you encourage your IXPs to implement ROV, then that will also help you as a peer at the ISP to trust the routing announcements that are coming across from your local peers. So that's in your interest and everyone else's as well. So encouraging your IXPs to implement is a good thing. You can set up route validation at your own border routers and then encourage your peers and your customers to do the same, to implement RPKI. And as I said, APNIC and both APNIC and TWNIC are here to help with this process. So please do be in touch if there's anything we can do to help. And that's all I have, so thank you very much. Very happy in the couple of minutes available if there are any questions. Okay, everything must be crystal clear. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And let's welcome the next speaker, David Conrad, CTO of ICANN, to deliver his speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much. David Conrad, ICANN CTO. I was asked to talk a bit about some of the security-related issues. So I put together a set of slides talking about just sort of sampling the various threats that I personally see related to the global internet. Some of this is related to stuff ICANN does, some of it isn't. I'll try to make that clear as we go through the slides. See if this works. Not that button. How about, there we go. So the first threat I wanted to discuss is something that's currently fairly active right now, even as we speak. And that's something known as domain name hijacking. As you're all aware, people prefer using names. The internet sort of relies on numbers. So DNS hijacking is taking advantage and compromising the translation mechanism between those two. The way this is done, well, unfortunately, it's typically done by the fact that people really are not good at using passwords. They use simple passwords. They use passwords across multiple sites. They don't use multi-factor authentication, even when it's available. There's also, today, it's really easy to get fooled by phishing attacks. Particularly given that in the past, we used to tell people, look for a padlock on your browser bar, and that means your connection is safe. Actually, that's not true anymore. If it ever was true, it's definitely not true now. You're able to get free certs from folks like Let's Encrypt by EFF, low-cost certs from Komodo. And that will allow you to get a little, allow an attacker to present a little padlock bar in your browser navigation bar. And very few people actually click on the padlock to see if it makes sense. The name actually matches what you thought you were going to. So that's another way that people have been compromised. Exploiting unpatched vulnerabilities in software. One of the ways the attackers right now have been leveraging, have been gaining access is by just using unpatched exploits in servers that are providing infrastructure for the DNS. So in general, what's been happening is registrars' accounts are being compromised. When the accounts are compromised, then people are allowed to, the attackers are able to insert whatever domain name records they want into the domain name, which means that it's trivial to implement man-on-the-middle attacks or eavesdropping attacks or those sorts of things. And also DNSSEC can't help you here because these are actually the authoritative records. The system is unable to tell the difference between you as the actual authorized user of the account and someone who's stolen your credentials. The other area that is a bit concerning is some of the attackers are trying to take advantage of what's known as the transitive trust relationship of the domain name system. What this means is you have a set of name servers for any domain. If you're able to compromise any of those name servers, or the name servers for those name servers repeat until end, then you're able to compromise the communications that goes through those name servers. So in those graphs that are almost unreadable, the top one is the transitive trust graph of .eu. And it's relatively straightforward. There, I think, are on the order of 16 nodes that represent the attack surface. So if the bad guys were able to compromise any one of those 16 nodes, which are represented by ovals, then they'd be able to redirect the DNS. The graph below, which is largely unreadable, is the transitive trust graph for Taiwan. What that reflects is that Taiwan has a large number of name servers and also relies on some external organizations to provide name service. So the transitive trust graph actually grows. This is a blown up image, still largely unreadable, but just to give you sort of a flavor of the increased attack surface associated with relying on external name servers. If any one of those are compromised, it does allow for ultimately a compromise of the names associated with .tw. And what that means is any name at the second level in TW, and then any names below that. Because the way the DNS works, if you're able to compromise somewhere up on the higher part of the tree, then folks down below the tree are also compromisable. Bad guys have been using this quite effectively recently. Some of you might have read about attacks. It was on Krebs Online and a bunch of security-related blogs. These attacks have primarily, most recently, been targeting actors within the Middle East. It's believed that it's being originated by a state-based actor, but attribution is always extremely hard in these cases. The attacks have been focused on large-scale infrastructure. So, for example, telephone companies, governments, utilities, those sorts of things. Unfortunately, these attacks have been quite successful. And the attackers have been fairly effective in hiding the attacks. One of the things that they did is they would change name server records for only like an hour, 4 or 5 times a day to try to minimize the chances that they'd be noticed. And as a result, this attack has been ongoing now for since some indications suggest since 2017. They were only recently sort of detected. And there has been some attempts at mitigation, but given that length of time and the fact that with redirection, the hijacking of the DNS, it allows for folks to man-in-the-middle attack, collect credentials, do pretty much anything they'd like. The chances that we've been able to identify all the compromised sites is actually quite low. Cache poisoning, talked a bit about this yesterday. So the way the internet scales via the DNS is that the resolvers keep a copy of the information that they've queried for. If bad guys are able to, they can insert bogus records instead of the actual records into the cache. This was actually specifically, DNSSEC, the DNS security enhancements, was specifically designed to address this. This is an actual flaw in the original specification of the DNS protocol, and it's actually quite effective if you're able to see the queries before they hit the authoritative server. If you, a bad guy, are able to see the queries before it goes to the authoritative server, you can respond more quickly than the authoritative server with bogus information. The mitigation for this particular attack is actually to enable DNSSEC. DNSSEC has two parts. There's the signing side, so if you're a domain name owner yourself, in most cases, you're able to sign your zone. DNSSEC signing your zone is a somewhat complicated function, but there are now a lot of tools that make it a lot easier, and increasingly some registries are providing sort of push-button DNSSEC enablement. For example, I personally use Cloudflare for one of my domains, and turning on DNSSEC is simply flipping a switch. The other side of DNSSEC is the validation side, and internet service providers need to enable this. Right now, we're seeing about 20% of responses being validated. One of the efforts that we're undertaking at ICANN is try to increase that number. Route system hijacking. This is a lot what involves what Paul was talking about. So this attack is to have a fake announcement be listened to by ISPs around the world. It's relatively common, happens with some frequency, mostly due to typos. There have been some occasions where it was seen as part of a malicious attack. Some of you might have heard of myetherwallet.com. That was an attack that utilized both route hijacking as well as cache poisoning, so it sort of collects the whole set of attacks. Mitigations for this, well, one thing would be that the ISPs could be more aggressive in filtering out the routing announcements by looking at existing routing registries. This is very labor intensive and hasn't really been very popular. RPKI that Paul discussed before does provide a new way of doing this. RPKI is, in my personal view, very complicated, but it does have quite a bit of promise in addressing at least some of the more common failures with regards to route hijacking, in particular the typos that occur. There are ways of getting around it that people are trying to explore solutions to, but I would encourage all ISPs to start looking at deploying RPKI within their routing announcements. Denial of service. This one has been really popular and only seems to be increasing with deployment of IoT devices and additional mechanisms on the internet that allows for the creation of vast amounts of traffic to flow from one corner to the next. It's very simple. You just sort of overwhelm the target, and there are a variety of ways you can do that. One of the ways actually uses the DNS. DNS has the interesting attribute that you don't have to establish a connection. You just send a datagram out, and you get a response back as a datagram. If you're able to spoof the source address, that is, make up the source address, you can target somebody by simply changing the source address to be them, send the packet out, and the response will go back to your target. If you're using the DNS, you can also amplify that by sending out a query. Generally, queries are about 90 bytes. There are particular queries that can result in very large responses on the order of 2K response. So a single 90-byte packet results in a 2K response. You can target that off to a victim, and very quickly, given there are hundreds of thousands at least of open resolvers out there, you can flood these sorts of attacks quite easily across the world. DNS is not the only protocol you can do this. NTP is also one that's used quite frequently. Memcache protocol is one that allowed for an amplification factor on the order of tens of thousands of bytes. The nice thing about denial of service is that it's so easy to implement. There are services, or there used to be quite a few services, where you could actually buy it online. It was called booter services or stressor services. Some law enforcement have been cutting down on those by actually closing up those shops, but it's still quite common these days, and the attacks continue to get larger. This graph was done in March of 2018 and showed a peak of 1.7 terabits per second. I've heard the current record is now at 2.4 terabits per second, which is a large amount of traffic that it's difficult to imagine being able to keep up with. Over time, this is likely to increase, and the sort of the slope of that graph is worrisome. How do you mitigate those? Well, you increase capacity and diversity, but that's sort of a short-term solution because it's always easier to find attack capacity than it is to pay for defensive capacity. Filter source addresses, ISPs, if they would implement something called Best Common Practice 38, BCP 38, it would help to reduce spoofing. It would help to reduce reflection attacks. There are costs to deploying BCP 38, so a lot of ISPs have not done so, but it's something that ISPs should consider doing. A lot of servers, services that are available on the internet have bottlenecks. If you're able to eliminate them, then you reduce the opportunity for denial of service attacks. And one of the key things is to try to fix vulnerabilities in software that allow people to create these botnet armies of compromised computer systems that can be used to attack victims across the internet. Phishing and spear phishing. So this is probably familiar to most of the people here. You create some sort of lure, something that looks like email that you would expect. I'll encourage people to click on some URL. That URL then takes you to a machine that causes malware to be installed on your computer, or presents you with a form that allows you to type in a user ID password, giving the bad guys access to your accounts. That URL at the top might look like something that, if you happen to use Gmail, look like something you might encounter. You may not have noticed that there is a tiny little dot under the M. That's actually a IDN in .com. That domain was, until about 3 days ago, held by a researcher who had put up a page that said, be very careful, this could be used for phishing. It appears that that researcher unfortunately let his registration expire, and it was just recently snapped up, apparently by someone who has a web page, a default web page in Chinese saying, congratulations, you set up your web page correctly. Right now, don't know where that's going to go to. It's hard to imagine a scenario in which that domain name would actually be useful for anything other than phishing, but it does exist and is currently in play. The mitigation of this, there are a bunch of technologies out that are helping to try to reduce the flood of spam, the flood of invalid email. They're known as SPF, DKIM, DMARC. ISPs need to deploy those on mail servers. Aggressively filter and quarantine spam. There's a lot of tools out there that will allow you to do that, some better, some worse. But be aggressive. It's better to maybe dump something into a quarantine so that you can look at it much more carefully than to accidentally click on something that will result in your machine getting compromised. And end user education and training. This is all part of cyber hygiene. It's doing things to try to protect yourself on the internet these days. At ICANN, we actually have a program where our IT department purposefully tries to send us phishing email, trying to fake us into clicking on links. And if you do, you get a friendly message saying you shouldn't have done that, and you get to have more anti-phishing training. This has actually been quite effective because the anti-phishing training is really quite boring. So I'd encourage people to look into doing that, encourage their companies to do that. Botnets. Botnets are basically just a whole bunch of compromised machines controlled by a bad guy through a command channel, usually synchronized via the DNS. Domain generation algorithms are used to create these domains that the malware will go and do queries to. If they get a response back, then they can establish a command and control connection to the botnet herder. The botnet herder then can, control hundreds of thousands or millions of machines and point them at whatever target they'd like to do whatever they'd like to do. For example, denial of service attacks, run spam, send out a whole bunch of spam, allow people to bounce through the compromised machines to hide their tracks in case they're trying to hide their activities. Botnets are usually created through phishing, spear phishing, spam, people clicking on things that they shouldn't, installing software they shouldn't. It is, right now, we're seeing within the domain abuse activity reporting system, we're seeing about 2 to 3% of domain names that are somehow associated with botnet command and control. So there are a lot of machines out there controlling a whole bunch of what are known as zombies or bots. Same sort of mitigations you get with phishing. Make sure you don't click on things you're not supposed to click on. Privacy violation and data breaches. As I'm sure all of you are aware, there are companies out there that have business models that are focused on collecting private information that they then use to sell targeted ads and those sorts of things. There are also folks who maintain very large databases of private information that get breached with really unfortunate frequency. That top graphic, Have I Been Pwned, is actually a really interesting website. You can sign up to it, put in your email address, and it'll tell you whether your email address has been found within any of the data breaches that the researcher actually collects, a guy named Troy Hunt. I've done that, and in fact, all of my email addresses that I use publicly have at one time or another been found on compromised databases that have been sold on the dark web. It's haveibeenpwned.com. I actually recommend its use. The data breaches are increasing in frequency and scale. There are, within the Have I Been Pwned database itself, I believe there are over 7 billion email accounts, which is pretty impressive given there are 4 billion people on the internet today. Mitigations with these, basically end user education always helps. Explain to people that if you are not paying for the service, you probably are the service. The information that you provide for organizations that are providing you services free of charge are how they make money when they turn around and sell that information for targeting ads and those sorts of things. If you're aware of that and okay with that, then that's fine. If you're not aware, then that's something you might want to make yourself aware of. Increased use of end-user encryption and authentication. It's useful to actually try to limit the amount of information that's propagated over the internet in plain text, because there are people out there who are watching for plain text and collecting it. And finally, implementation and enforcement of data privacy laws. The data privacy law of interest these days is GDPR, but it is by far not unique. Many countries are implementing similar data privacy regulations. In fact, some U.S. states are even implementing data privacy regulations, which annoys some of the companies in those states. Misinformation, also known as fake news. This has become increasingly obvious to people. There is a tremendous amount of misinformation on the internet, the application of age-old techniques of propaganda, the exploitation of confirmation bias. All of those things allow for information to propagate that actually has no basis in reality. The implication of that is that it reduces trust in the traditional information sources, and it also tends to result in governments, politicians want to do things, coming up with ways of trying to control or limit the propagation of that information. And unfortunately, sometimes the good gets thrown out with the bad. Misinformation and good information get blocked equally. Mitigation to this, as always, more end user training, get people to understand how to identify false news sources. There are a number of telltales that unfortunately it's actually gotten a little harder because GDPR makes it difficult to look up information in the who is to try to figure out if someone is not really associated with the New York Times. But trying to identify the sources of information and at least find corroborating information independent of the original source can help in trying to reduce misinformation. Fragmentation of the internet. This is something that is, sometimes as a result of misinformation flows. People are beginning, governments in particular, are beginning to try to create their own islands of the internet. This is a understandable reaction to the challenges that's seen if you try to have more control of the information that flows in and out of your country. The downside is that it can result in blockage of useful information that people rely on. A study by Brookings Institute in 2016 showed that blocking of the internet resulted in a net loss of about $4.2 billion in GDP. Mitigation of this, so ideally we could go back to something that may never have actually existed, the end-to-end model of the internet. Trying to minimize the amount of devices in between the end-to-end connection. Virtual private networks are a way of getting around blockage in many cases, although you then get into a cat and mouse game where folks are trying to block the VPNs, which results in new VPNs, and it just sort of goes endless cycle that way. But also trying to explain to particularly politicians, people who are trying to generate laws, the implications of the fragmentation and the partitioning that results from setting up, national level firewalls, national level filtering schemes. Oops. There we go. Summarizing. So a lot of these threats are leveraging some of the fundamental aspects of the DNS, of the internet. So things like the naming system, the routing system, and the ability to send lots of data at low cost. The individual network operators and end users do have some mechanisms to try to address some of these risks, these threats. They include, most importantly, improving cyber hygiene, just trying to make sure that you have good passwords, you don't reuse the passwords, you use multi-factor authentication, deploy DNSSEC, make sure it's turned on, those sorts of things. But ultimately, preventing these attacks are becoming increasingly complicated. The bad guys are, in my view, in the lead. They can move much more quickly than the good guys. Trying to get law enforcement to work cross-jurisdictionally, despite interests on both sides, often takes quite a bit of time, whereas the bad guys can move in the minutes time frames. Ultimately, the risks of the unanticipated consequences, collateral damage, as we've seen with GDPR and the impact on who is significant, but end user education is hopefully one way that we can address some of these concerns. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions in the -2 minutes we have left. Good, I've scared everybody. No. Thank you very much.
So please stay on the stage. Let's have a group shot here. And also Mr. Paul Wilson, please come to the stage. And now, while we are having the stage, the next session will be concerning about the security, and we will begin very soon. So after the group shot here, we will we'll ask all the speakers to come on the stage. And this section will be collaborative security, responsibility, confidence, and consensus. The moderator is the Deputy CEO of TWNIC, Joey Chen. The speakers are David Conrad, the CTO of ICANN, Bob Hong, the General Manager of Taiwan Business Unit of Trend Micro, Geoff Houston, the Chief Scientist of APNIC, and Yukako Uchida, Leader of Global Coordination Division of the JP Cert CC. Let's give them an applause to welcome them.
Well, everybody want to talk about security, I guess. Okay, so my honorable panelists, please have a seat. So yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Joy Chen, and I work for TWNIC, also for the TW Search/CC, which is the coordinator center. And it's my honor to have my panelists here on the stage. We're going to be talking about security. And it's not just any security, it's the collaborative security. So I think it's going to be a very interesting session. And as you all have heard the keynote from David, he has shared a lot of the different threats, the different methods of the threats. And the bad guys are really very intelligent as well. So I think we're going to have a very interesting discussion today. And before I introduce everyone on the stage, I also want to share with you that the way that we're going to run this forum for this session is that every one of my panelists will share a little bit about their views on the collaborative security. And we welcome all the comments and questions. So with the two open mics on the floor, I will encourage you to come to the mic and share with us while we are doing our presentation or discussions. And I will wait for the proper pause for you to share your comments and the questions. Okay, so first you have already know David. David just gave this wonderful keynote, and he's coming from ICANN with the CTO. So with all the technology aspects and all the experiences, I'm sure it's going to be a wonderful thing. And Bob, as many of you from locally will know that he's coming from Trend Micro. That's a brand name here from Taiwan, and we'd be very happy to share his thoughts locally. And of course, Jeff. Jeff is the chief scientist from APNIC, and from his experience and also some of the comments that I have heard from him yesterday, I know that he's got a lot to share with the audiences, depending on how much that we can ask and dig out from him, right, Jeff? And obviously from our community, from the security community, from JP Search, we have Yoka here. So without further delay, I'd like to have each one of our panelists to start doing some sharing. But I'm going to give David maybe a little break since you just did the wonderful keynote. Do you mind? No, okay. Okay. So why don't we just go by with Bob? Maybe do you want to share some of your thoughts with the team on the collaborative security? Okay. Do we have the?
Yes. Can I use my slide? All right. Okay. I think I prefer stand here to do my presentation. Okay. First of all, I'm glad to be here to share my thoughts and also learn from our experts from different aspects for this very important topic is the collaborative security. Okay, I would like to have brief introduce about Trend Micro. Trend Micro was founded in 1988. So in past 30 years, we focus on cybersecurity industry. And we start from antivirus, and in the past 10 years, we dedicate in data center and the cloud security, and also the advanced threat defense. In 2012, Taiwan team found incident response team. In the past 6 years, we have been conduct more than 500 incident investigation for more than 200 customers. So what I'm going to share is based on my observation for the cyber incident handling experience. Okay, so well, this should be next. Okay, good. Also, we understand threat intelligence is so critical for threat defense. Okay, well, it may include these three parts, but not limited in these three parts. Also, it's about what's the hacker's tactics and what's the technology hacker used, and also the vulnerability. We all know the critical vulnerability could create huge damage. Take example of the WannaCry ransomware in 2017. Well, it's leveraging the vulnerability internal group. It's very, very famous one. But I personally think the vulnerability sharing is already reached certain level of maturity, because there's the organization like ZDI, Zero Day Initiative, and adopt the bounty program to encourage researchers to report the vulnerability. And also, very important is the technology they used. Just as Debbie just shared, a lot of new technology like ballast, like new malware, new CNC, that kind of things. And also, equally important, I think, is hackers' tactics. It means how hackers penetrate the organization, what kind of point of entry, how they do the lateral movement, what kind of system they want to leverage to dispute the malware, and also what kind of tool they do the control. Like they normally will use the normal tools, the IT will use like PowerShell, like a remote desktop, that kind of things, and how they do it. So I think this is very important for not just for threat defense, also for the threat investigation. Our IR team, incident response team, we always found the same tactic, the same technology, same methods used in different victims again and again and again. Okay, so because of that, so I think the government more or less will take initiatives about how to share the threat intelligence. Take Taiwan as an example. Department of Cybersecurity was founded in 2016, and also in 2017, the department already launched a cybersecurity infrastructure enhancement project. Okay, so in this project, the government defined the 5 domains of critical infrastructure, including like a government agency, the banking, finance, telecom, etc. A lot of critical infrastructure. And also each domain have a so-called ISAC, Information Sharing Analysis Center. So all the critical infrastructure owners, they should report the cyber incident to the domain ISAC. And domain ISAC will, after collection the information and the analysis, they will share to other infrastructure owners. And also all the information will report to the national ISAC, and also report to like TWNIC, because of TWNIC plays the CERT-DC role. Okay, so and also in the near future, the government will have so-called domain CERT and domain SOC, and the national CERT and national SOC. So I just screen capture from our government document. Okay, so all the design I think is very comprehensive, and the vision is also great. However, in the real practice, the real challenge is the why the critical infrastructure owner wanted to share the information. Okay, so I just list a few challenges based on my observation. First of all, is there's no lack of motivation and neutral profit. So currently, till now, I think the regulation enforcement is still the key driver for the victim to report the incident. And also, at the end, the punishment is more than help for the victim to report a cyber incident. Why? And the punishment is not about the government authority, the penalty. It's about, for example, the information disclosure will make the damage of the company or the organization reputation. But if this is a private company, that it means you will lose customer trust, and also you may impact your stock price, which is the biggest worry for the CEO, right? And also the second thing is, so at the end, as a result is to compliance. So they will try to report, but they will try to report as less as possible, okay, to prevent the further damage. And also the cyber threat is more customized than ever. Based on our research, then currently 90% of malware just affects one machine, which means hacker is targeting the certain target. So the malware is designed, is also modified and customized, just attack the single target. And 60% of malicious domain just alive less than 1 hour, because hackers don't want to be tracked. So that's the reality. So it means when we share the malware sample, when we share the CNC, actually the value is decreasing. It's not like before. In virus outbreak age, then just one sample we can secure millions of customers. However, now just secure one customers. Okay, and also if we want to understand whole attacking campaign, which means that we need to know the tactics, the technology, the killer chain, the root cause analysis, which means it takes longer time, and also it requires very expert, cybersecurity expert to doing so. However, the reality is it is serious lackage of the the cybersecurity expert skill set. Okay, so here's a little bit suggestion. I think there's some area we can improve. First of all, is we need to build up the ability and capacity for the instant response, instant investigation, even threat research for like a national cert, like a domain cert. Because if you want to let the victim to willing to report the incident, which means we may need to provide some help, which means when the report comes, then we should have some like instant mitigation services to them. Then this is a mutual benefit. Then they'll start willing to report incident. And also for the commercial sector, still need to build up the in-house, like a CSIRT, the incident response team, or you need to outsource to the vendors that have a capacity to do so. And also, if we have a mechanism to share the strategy, but without the victim information disclosure, that will be much more easy for every victim to willing to share the cyber incident. Okay, then finally, we should facilitate the atmosphere of collaboration. How to do that? First of all, I think we need to have educate the right concept, attitude to the authority and also the public. At this time, still a lot of people, they think the company get compromised is unforgivable. However, if the modern defense concept is prevention is not possible, but how to have early detection and very quick response is the right way to do. So if this concept is not well educated to the people, then every time when we see news about which company get compromised, we will fingerpoint to the company, and nobody wants to admit that kind of thing happened. So it requires educate again and again. Okay, this is my first journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bob. I think, this is great talk, a lot of the good reminders. And can we move on to Jeff?
Sure, thank you. It's on, is it? Thank you. Thank you and good morning all. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Jeff Houston. I am the Chief Scientist at APNIC, and my job is thinking. So I certainly have some thoughts about this whole issue around almost did it, around security. Even the simplest of things, and a steam engine is not intrinsically that difficult. There are very few components, but they used to fail in amazing ways. So even the simplest of things can have catastrophic failure. When we go to more complex engines, like this remote control, the failures are far more epic. Now, I was tempted to put in a picture of a 737 MAX because the software failure there is a typical example. That as we create more and more complex machinery in our world, the ability of that machinery to operate in ways that we never thought about and create epic failures is always there. If we think security is a fight, we will never win it. It is unwinnable. What we want from our network and our computers is complexity, is to guess my thought, is to be helpful, is to be incredibly complex. The result of that complexity is an ever larger risk of failure. So failure is now not slight. Failure is catastrophic. If I can hack into the local traffic signs in this city, I can cause this city to stop. If I can hack into the water system, watch out, or your electricity system. All of these systems are online. All of these systems are vulnerable. All of them, at their heart, have some version of Linux running. All of them use the same libraries. So our societies that use more and more and more of these systems. The WannaCry virus infected the UK NHS system and caused their scanners to go down. All these subtle effects are always with us. If we undermine security and integrity, we have really big problems today, problems that were never there a generation ago. So this is not an abstract conversation. This is a conversation about our society today. And it is bizarre. The biggest attack we saw, might still be the biggest, it's certainly a massive one, was caused by baby camera web monitors. Unbelievable, but nevertheless true, that it brought down the DNS infrastructure of the entire east coast of the US by harnessing a few million of these web cameras and sending DNS queries into a melt spot. The DNS melted, the internet melted, life was bad for a few hours. Baby web camera monitors. What did you buy? Well, you bought a camera. What was inside it? A full-blown TCP/IP stack. What was inside that? An admin password that was actually published. What happened? Someone released a virus that harnessed all these cameras and just sent them to fetch URLs. Nothing was difficult. Attackers don't necessarily have PhDs. Attackers do the minimum possible work to cause the maximum possible damage. And what we do is field cheap, shoddy equipment that is readily subverted with almost no effort. This was a really easy hack for one of the most major events in the last few years. What are we doing about it? Good question. Certainly at APNIC, we can't ignore this, and we will not ignore it. In the address world, we understand we're part of a broader area of providing infrastructure services. IP addresses are part of the names and addressing system, and they're the bedrock of the internet. If we get this wrong, we have problems. All of us have problems. So we have a number of themes in which we're working in this, and you can see it on the slide there, that we do look very closely at DNSSEC. As you saw from Paul's presentation, we have invested years, in fact it's getting close to decades of effort, in looking at how to help secure the routing system. It's an intrinsic part of what we do. We're certainly very, very active in security cooperation and skills and knowledge, particularly with law enforcement. So we have a number of these. What we also do is figure out what our stakeholders want, what our community of members and other stakeholders actually want from us. What can we do to help? We survey them every 2 years. And although it's a busy slide, and I apologise, some years ago, V6, 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 V6. Today, V6 is still there, as well as the scarcity of V4 addresses and trading. But what's at the top? Network security. And in every single part, East Asia, Oceania, Southeast Asia, with the lesser developed countries and developing, all of them rank security as the greatest issue, the main challenge facing their organisation, which is, I think, part of the reason why you're here today and we're here today. We take it seriously. So what aspects of that are the main challenges? We are all worried about phishing, spam, malware and ransomware. The insidious way they work, the way they dupe users who actually shouldn't know better. The attacks are sophisticated in that sense, is our number one concern. The DDoS attacks are also of concern. Intrusion, other breaches, staff lack of awareness and not attending enough phishing courses, David, is certainly up there. Oddly enough, routing security is not a major issue. And part of the reason is actually that the web PKI protects a lot of sites from the worst side effects of a routing attack. And the other little graph there, how might APNIC assist? Well, we get the message. What you want from us is training. What you want from us is assistance with collaboration. What you want from us is to publish articles on our blog and disseminate security-related topics and content. We hear you, we are doing that. So what do? We certainly share and collaborate. We work at our members' meetings and all the other NOG forums to talk about security. We work with the national internet registries to ensure that our own asset, the address database, where addresses are, is as accurate as possible all the time. We're trying to make those query mechanisms be aligned so that when you look it up, the information is always right. And we're now working with the community to make sure that the point of contact information is actually up to date and valid. If you think there is an owner of an address that needs to know that their address is being hijacked, we're trying to make sure that the point of contact information is now valid. We're also working with the various certs and the CSerts to strengthen collaboration and to coordinate that security community, including the law enforcement community, to actually work all on the same page. I want to talk a little bit more about one thing, though, which is different from Trend Micro, because with Trend, you're looking at attacks on machines. The machine is being co-opted to do something that wasn't intended. Infrastructure security is actually entirely different. The machine's just fine. It's doing exactly what you intended it to do. But if I can make the name, the DNS, send you to somewhere bad, or the address infrastructure send you to somewhere bad, I don't have to attack your machine because I've changed the underlying fabric of the internet to suit my evil deeds, to suit my evil purpose. Infrastructure attacks are the most insidious. They're the hardest to detect, and they are the most wide-ranging. If I was a malign and malicious person, I must admit, I would look at addressing and routing as the point to attack. Everything else is kind of minor. If I really wanted to cause mayhem, that's where I would go. So how would I improve it? How are we improving it? We have very few tools available to us. Remarkably few. If I've never met you, and you're on the internet and I'm on the internet, how can you trust me? We can't meet, we can't exchange name cards, we can't talk, we can't establish each other's identity. Why should you trust me? What we've resorted to is keying infrastructure and cryptography. So I've never met you and you've never met me, but we might both know Paul. If Paul and I can say we trust each other, and you and Paul can say we trust each other, then maybe we can use Paul as a referral mechanism to say, well, maybe we can trust each other. So we use that mechanism of transitive trust inside RPKI to do routing security, and actually inside DNSSEC to do DNS security. Cryptography is essential. In APNIC, we've now spent 15 years working at this, about testable attestations. Paul has gone through this in detail, so I won't spend much time at it. But certainly, this is a very serious area for us, and we've devoted a lot of time and effort at it. We also strongly support the names community in looking at DNSSEC and DNSSEC validation. We do long-range measurements, we do a lot of analysis and a lot of work inside understanding how the DNS works to actually ensure that we can make the DNS as secure as we possibly can. But if this is a fight, we're never going to win it, and we might well be losing it. Because the defender is at a disadvantage. We have to defend everything all of the time. And this is not something that's easy. And indeed, the whole threat landscape is actually not as simple as you think. We used to always see this as a good guys, bad guys. The bad guys are bad, and the good guys are the certs and the C-certs and the trend micros who work to try and catch the bad guys. But that's not true. There's actually a third party, the security consultants. When your organisation is hacked, who do you call? Well, you might call a private consultancy firm. They're an interesting bunch of people. They pay more than the public enterprises, so they actually have the best people working for them. And they're not interested in catching the criminal. They're not even interested in fixing the problem. When a customer, a victim, pays the money, their major motivation is to deflect future attacks, to make sure that that victim is never a victim again. Oddly enough, that third party is one of the major parties in our fight against malware and our fight against all these kinds of badness on the internet. But oddly enough, their motives aren't to make it better. Their motives are simply to protect their clients. And so this three-way fight between the good guys and the public, between the public good guys and the private good guys and the bad guys is causing us all a fair deal of angst and confusion. How can we work together is actually not public and public, but a conversation about public and private to actually make sure that threat information is not a private asset, but a public good, to make sure that the tools available to everyone actually allow us this more effective in fighting this problem. Thank you.
Wonderful, isn't it? So now you have heard the words of wisdom from the chief scientist, right? I don't know how many of you will go home tonight and take down your baby camera monitors. But obviously, I think there is a good balance between the threat and security and protection. So, and also I appreciate when Jeff mentioned all this and coming down to the end, it's really the infrastructure, the protection. So ICANN and APNIC and so does TWNIC has put in a lot of the efforts talking about the DNSSEC, the RPKIs. So Paul's talking about RPKI. I hope everybody gets a better view on it. So I'll pass the microphone to our next panelist, Yoka. Yoka is from JP Cert. That's also serving as a security community, and she's doing a lot of the outreach and the coordination work. So let's give a good hand to Yoka.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Yukako Uchida. I work for the JP CERT Coordination Center, the national CERT of Japan. And, well, Bob mentioned about the collaboration between the, a lot of organizations involved in CERTs and, collaboration mechanism between those organizations. And I would like to talk about, well, just an example of our behalf. What we're doing as JP CERT, and maybe explain a little bit about the role of CERTs that we're doing at JP CERT. So just a little introduction about what a CERT is doing is that when there is a cybersecurity incident reported from the victim themselves or any other parties like security vendors or anyone who detected the cybersecurity incidents, they can report to CERTs like us. And then we will verify the incidents, and then we will coordinate in order to solve that situation. So we will be talking to, for example, to ISP or to system administrators. And then this is also important because, well, when it comes to an incident that requires coordination between, with other countries, for example, incident that is happening outside of Japan's network, we will have to contact the CCERT in that country so that we will request for help in that country in question. So this is where the international collaboration is required, and my main role at JP CERT is to establish relationship between national CERTs in other countries so that we can collaborate smoothly in case of cybersecurity incidents. And we're, I mean, at JP CERT we're making a lot of efforts in doing so, like creating a collaborative relationship with the both local and also international communities. So I'd like to introduce some of the efforts that we're making in this regard. So this just map shows that what kind of organizations that we work with. Like we work with the CSIRT communities and also a lot of vendors and ISPs and the industrial entities, etc., in order to solve incidents that are reported to us. And I'd like to mention some of the national, local efforts that we're making. So Bob mentioned about the ISACs that is existing in Taiwanese community. In Japan also we have several ISACs in place. For example, the biggest one is the financial sector, and also there's others in electricity and ICT sector as well. And there are others also on the way creating ISACs. And one thing I would like to introduce is in Japan we have the Nippon CSIRT Association. This is the local community for CERTs. For example, the CERTs that is operating under the enterprises, or for example universities and those entities. It is really common in Japan to create CSIRT within the commercial entities and those any companies, and then we have a growing number of members in there. JP CERT playing a role in that NCA community as well, being one of the steering committee member for a long while, and leading the discussion. This community actually creates a venue for CERT in the local community to actually collaborate with each other. So they have a set of different working group activities. They have, for example, exercises that they conduct, or they have like conferences so they can, present what they're doing, or for example, case studies about incident that they have handled recently, etc. So this creates a venue really for like exchanging information, or maybe like asking for help when it comes to incidents that require help from others. That's one thing that they're doing in Japan. And I would also like to mention about the global outreach that we're making. So this is the number of the CCTLDs that we have coordinated with during the past 7-8 years. This is a number of, you can simply count it as a number of countries that we have coordinated with in terms of solving incidents. So we have connection to different parts of different CERTs in different parts of the world, and then we have reached out to this many CSIRTs in solving incidents. However, other than the 80 CERTs that we have contacted or we have communicated in 2017, we also have other. We were also connected to other CERTs. This is just a number of the cases that we have handled, the incident handled with those CCTLDs. So other than those, we had some mutual incident with. We also have other CERTs that we can also reach out to, and these efforts have been made, or I could say we have established this kind of incident handling coordination. Coordination relations through the CSIRT community effort. For example, FIRST, which is the global framework for the CERTs. I believe there are some members joining from Taiwan as well. And also AP CERT, which is the Asia Pacific CSIRT community, which is mainly driven by the national or leading CERTs in this region. And also, I'd like to mention that the JP CERT has been making a lot of efforts in capacity building as well. I know that in Jeff's slides, the APNIC is also helping the setting up of the CERTs in the region. We're also helping that kind of activity as well. So we have been to these countries listed there on the slides, mainly in the Asia Pacific region, to help out those who would like to set up a CERT, or like newly established certs with some technical capabilities. So we've been doing a lot of trainings there as well. And yeah, just coming to the end, I would like to mention about the CCERT collaboration network. So we do, this is the member of AP-CERT community, which is the Asia Pacific Computer Emergency Response Team. And we'd like to introduce that we do have the collaboration mechanism within the AP region, at least for the national or leading certs to exchange information or request for coordination when it comes to incident that requires help from other countries. So we have a lot of leading certs listed here in this map. We have 3 member teams joining from Taiwan, TWN CERT and TW CERT CC, and also EC CERT. EC CERT is the CERT that takes care of the e-commerce problems here in Taiwan. And also JP CERT has been serving to the community for a long while. We have been the secretariat since the establishment of this community in AP CERT. So this is the collaboration mechanism. And just this will be my last slide. So those of you who are familiar with the Paris call that Mr. Maimura mentioned during the first day in the keynote speech, I think there was a statement regarding the cyber hygiene, and we're also making efforts in this aspect as well. So this was last year. We have launched and released a new service on our webpage, just called Mejiro, Internet Risk Visualization Service. This actually, you know, we have sorts of data collected from different services, and we put together and to make it easier to see how much risks you have in each economy's internet environment. And then you can actually make different kinds of graphs and different statistics on a website. You can choose different countries and also different protocols that they have different kinds of vulnerable risks, for example, NTP and DNS, et cetera, et cetera. And we have made these statistics available as according to the size of the IP address that is allocated to each country. So this is actually cross-comparable between one country and another. The graph on the right, this is the example of the comparison of Japan, Korea, and China. I mean, no, I just picked it up because there's just a number of countries. But you can see the different sorts of numbers of the index that is assigned to each countries, and you will see what protocol we have the more risk or less risk, and you can also compare like this. And the left graph, you can see that the blue line shows the average number, and then you will be able to see how far from the average line you're doing better or you're doing worse compared to the average. So this might be, we're hoping that this tool will be one of the tools to help you actually work on the creating a cyber hygiene. And I mean, like cleanup activity would be one of the hopeful results from this tool. So this is accessible from the URL over there. So if you're interested about the statistics in Taiwan, please do access that website. So I think I talked enough, and I'll stop here. And then this is the contact information. So that's all. Thank you.
I think JP CERT is a very similar organization like TW Search. So any domestic things, please do refer to TW Search, and we work well with our community as well. So David, it's all yours.
Sure. So I'll spare you slides this time, so something not to read. As anyone in this room is probably aware, ICANN is both a community and an organization. And the ICANN organization's role is to try to facilitate the work of the community. The bylaws that ICANN now works under, which were defined as a result of the transition of the INF functions, requires the ICANN organization to work to ensure the security and stability of the DNS and the Internet System of Unique Identifiers. And the way we do that is to work collaboratively with the community in order to identify areas of risk and try to address those areas as best we can. So ICANN has within its structure the Security Stability Advisory Committee, which works to provide input and advice to the ICANN board and community about risks that they identify as important to the security and stability of the Internet's unique system of identifiers. We also have a periodic review, the Security Stability and Resiliency Review. Currently, the second iteration of that review is ongoing. Kaveh here is the board liaison to SSR2, the review team. And that review is looking at the areas in which ICANN is working for good or ill with regards to improving the security of the Internet System of Unique Identifiers. Also reviewing the past results of the reviews that had been done. These review teams are actually created from the community. As a result of the transition, the review team members come from the various supporting organizations and advisory committees within the ICANN community itself. And they have essentially free rein to review all aspects of how ICANN performs its functions. Outside of the ICANN community directly, we also work with a variety of organizations involved in something having to do with security. For example, we're members of APWG and MOG, the messaging, whatever their acronym. It gets very long. I keep getting it confused. We participate in the ISOI. We are a member of various of the FIRST and other trust-based organizations to try to identify security issues before they have an impact on the systems that ICANN helps coordinates. Within my group itself, my group, the Office of the CTO, we have a number of projects that are aimed at working to try to improve systemic security. One of those is the Domain Abuse Activity Reporting System, or DAR. That system tries to collect information associated with domain abuse through the new GTLD program and report on that abuse to provide input and information to the community to help guide policy discussions on those topics. Right now it focuses specifically on the GTLDs, the generic top-level domains, but we're looking to expand that to work with registrars as well as any country code top-level domain that would be interested in participating with that particular project. We also believe that in order to sort of work on something, you need to be able to measure it. A result of that is a project called the Identifier Technologies Health Indicators, ITHI. TWNIC is actually participating in this particular project. The intent of that is to try to define a set of metrics and indicators that will provide information about whether the health of the Internet is improving or getting worse based on activities undertaken by ICANN. Right now we have, I believe, about 32 different metrics that we're collecting, and the idea is to actually have a baseline of those metrics, and anytime something changes, a policy changes, something like GDPR is implemented, we hope to be able to track the impact of that change through these metrics. We also deploy root instances in order to try to help improve the resiliency of the root system. ICANN currently has about 160 instances of the root server deployed around the world. I believe Changhua Telecom actually operates one of the root instances here in Taiwan. As Bob had mentioned, one of the key issues is education. And one of the things my group in particular has undertaken is training and capacity building. We go all over the world to work with various groups, particularly law enforcement, governments, anti-abuse communities, internet service providers, registries, and registrars, to try to provide them with information about how best to secure and improve the security of the system of unique identifiers, provide information, particularly to law enforcement, about what it is that ICANN does and what we don't do, to try to help people understand the ways in which the internet actually works and the role that ICANN and the various community members have within the internet. And in the interest of time, I will conclude my remarks saying that education is actually one of the most important areas of trying to address security. As Jeff pointed out, the complexity of the systems that we now rely on has only increased and will only increase. And I think the only way that we're going to be able to deal with the security threats that we have in front of us is to actually educate people to make them understand what role they have in trying to secure those systems. And back to Joy.
Thank you, David. I think that's a good conclusion. Back to the basic when we're talking about all these wonderful things. The education, the training, the very fundamental knowledge is probably the foundation for everything when we're talking about security, because security comes in every flavor, in every forms. And to work on the security community, I think there requires many different aspects. And I think it's wonderful that we have a very diverse panelist here. So I welcome any question from the floor, anything, comments, questions that you have heard. I think that it's wonderful to know that we all care about security, because yesterday we also mentioned a lot about one world, one internet. When we want to trust this internet, what do we really do? And the security is definitely one of the topic. All right, Kenny, the mic is yours.
Yes, thank you, Kenny Huang, TWNIC, and also Executive Council of APNIC. My question probably not directly related to the security itself, but my question is related to how an institution going to be a long-term sustainable operation based on a security concept. For example, like we have one of panelists probably is a commercial company, and a commercial company provides a service for reward. But the rest of the panelists probably your organization subsidize the cost of security, either for training, either for delivering the service. Actually, the cost was subsidized by the mother institution. So what's the base model for long-term operation based on the security requirement? Because it's not simple demand and supply issue. We need to consider long-term sustainability issue. Thank you.
Good question, Kenny. And in some ways, I would actually say the long-term sustaining view of the internet is that it's a toxic wasteland that radiates in the dark and we can't fix it. In a world of billions of devices, where devices are built at the lowest possible cost and the highest possible volume, quality is impossible. We've had this before in our urban landscape where we live. And the response has been gated communities, where the few that are rich isolate themselves from everyone else. In the internet, the long-term, ongoing future is that security is a luxury good. If you can afford it, you can put your services with Akamai, or Cloudflare, or Fastly, or any one of the few remaining giants who can afford to build a castle which is so high and the walls are so thick that the attackers can't penetrate the wall. They just absorb the attack because the attack is inevitable. Everyone else has a problem. And this is the internet that we have. And we decry the fact that the internet's being populated by just a few giants. But at the same time, the very toxic basis of the internet itself actually makes sure that only the giants can survive. Only the folk who have enough money and resources to build these giant castles that can deflect the attack actually get left. If your bank isn't served by one of these massive content houses, your bank is at risk. If your government infrastructure, and so on. We're all retreating behind the castles, and that's the future of the internet, a small bunch of gated communities operated by a very small number of castle operators. It's a terrible vision, but unfortunately, I suspect it's all but inevitable.
I have to say that it's relatively unique in my experience that I get to be an optimist. I tend to have sort of a negative view of the world, but I think Jeff has outstripped me this time. I think part of the issue that we face is that it's a sort of a form of market failure. Security is not computed in the individual's decision about purchasing a product or a service. It is something that you think about after you've been attacked, after you've had your data compromised, or you find your credit card numbers being used to purchase things you have no interest in. My experience or my understanding is that a typical response to market failures is for the imposition of regulations. So perhaps the optimistic outlook in contravention to Jeff's vision of the apocalyptic future may be that we increasingly see governmental mandates that say, if you are going to attach your device to the network, it must meet this basic level of certification. You can't have hardwired passwords that are known on the internet. You have to have the ability to block certain forms of traffic or certain floods of traffic. And whether or not this is mandated by law or mandated by procurement processes is, a implementation choice. But fundamentally, we have to figure out a way to encourage people to actually understand that security is not something that as a bolt-on. It has to be built from the ground up and has to be incorporated internally from at all levels. Because if we don't, then the bad guys have the ability to take advantage of those vulnerabilities and drive forward their particular agendas.
Wonderful.
Thank you. I wanted to add, I agree mostly with David. I think there is an issue right now, but and it's not only regulation that can resolve this. There are other scenarios. If you look at, for example, electricity light bulbs, insurance comes to play. So it might be required later on that for your home insurance, you need to have certified devices, for example, or for your fire insurance, for whatever reason, security insurance if you have. They say, oh, you need to have devices with these markings, otherwise your premium will be much higher. So people will want to buy devices which have minimum compliance. So it's not only government forces, sometimes markets can even self-correct. So I think my personal view of the future, I think, yes, we have issues, but the way market will correct is actually via this free market methods, which is, for example, insurance is a good example. That will impose requirements, and then manufacturers, that would be in their best interest to comply with those requirements. And
one additional way may be liabilities. So, if you develop software or products or services that result in a huge loss, you may be subject to some portion of that loss.
It's market,
Just make a point.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Let me say in response that they were perfectly good baby web monitors. The camera was great. The microphone was perfect. It did exactly what it said it was going to do. It's just that it did a bit more. And each baby webcam monitor did not invoke disaster. They only sent a couple of packets a second that were wrong. Orchestrating millions of it to do it at the same time was the issue. Was the baby webcam monitor the problem? Some would say yes, but I would actually say no, it was a baby webcam monitor. And that it was actually the context and machinery that turned it into something evil and ugly. And so it's not as simple in my mind as regulating the product, because in some ways it's the environment in which the product is deployed that causes our problems, not that the product does a few DNS queries.
Yeah, but if as a citizen you're liable for publishing any photo of a baby without permit or whatever, something like that, then you will take care of buying which device you select, and you will look into any kind of credentials on the device that, hey, this actually protects you from that, and the manufacturer is insured. So if you're...
It didn't leak pictures. It didn't do anything wrong. It just sent a couple of DNS queries
I'm just trying
off
to say,
one side.
as an example,
And so, as I said, it's not that the product was bad. The product was perfectly good and fit for purpose. It just had a few extra features.
Okay, I think we may need another session for the baby monitor. But let's turn the open mic to Paul was first. Okay, thank you, Paul.
Thanks. Unlike Jeff, I'm I'm not such a pessimist, but I think there are concrete developments which are underway at the moment which give us some reason for optimism. The IETF is working on standards for software upgrade of so-called IoT devices, of connected things. There's something called MUD, Manufacturer Usage Description standard for manufacturers to build in a standardized way for devices to declare what they intend to do. So your baby monitor can tell the home gateway that all it is expecting to do is to send pictures and not to be accessing the web or other TCP/IP ports and so on. I think this is about the extent of my knowledge of these developments, but my understanding is that there's quite a bit underway that gives us some cause for hope that at least we are maintaining pace. So maybe some of the panelists know about these developments, and we could talk a bit more about what concretely is coming rather than all the disasters that have undeniably happened so far.
Let me just do a quick feedback. I think for the IP camera in Taiwan, that the government agency does have some kind of regulation. So the basic requirement needs to be done. However, this project was a part of this IoT security guideline. So IP camera was just the first and probably one of the most important one, just to update for the audience. And let me just turn this to...
Yeah, this is Guowei again. And I think I have just one comment and one, question. I don't want to jump into the debate and arguing with all of you, because we can spend hour to talking about that. I think the first comment is we usually say one world, one internet, but to be honest, I don't believe it, because one world, one internet is broken already. Right now in the world, you can see more and more people, particularly the government is already hand in. So let one world, one internet is not there anymore. There's the first point, it's a comment, okay? And you want to debate, I'm fine. The second point is, in here we're talking about security, the internet security. To be honest, the internet security is massive, it's wide. It's really difficult to say, which part is a security. And here is a question for you is, I really like to know is, as a government or as a nation, like in Taiwan or any countries, if you want to do something about the security, what is the first three things you think about have to do? For example, like a DNS, for example, the routing security, because at least as I know, in some of the countries, spend too much time playing the game like a hackathon. I think that's just a game. It's a security game. It's not a really security at all. But routing is really a serious problem. And routing, how we can do it, make it really better and in a much reliable way, because we see a lot of routing fault and routing problems, and they actually is much serious to impact to the country or the society securities. But in generally, the routing actually is not really the people or the government or the industry really put the eyes on. They thought about, well, if the packet can go through God, thanks, there's already is a good news, So it's difficult to figure out, how to really put the security, in the routing, because particularly for Taiwan, a lot of problem, the traffic actually from China. And how we can make sure our routing is not go through the China, and really can secure, or forget about the China, you say the country X, just like, you remember the Snowden issue happened. I think you heard that the Germany Prime Minister, he said he want to build a Europe net. But actually, it's not as simple, because in the business way, you're thinking about it. In many cases, actually, you routing to the US and coming back is cheaper and faster. And that is a very difficult decision. You want to go routing somewhere else and coming back is easy and faster, or another better way to do it. Thank you.
Comment?
I'll just say that with regards to your last question regarding how to secure or how to ensure your routing does what you think it does, is that you can't. You just simply can't. If you want security, if you want to ensure that the data that you are transiting over the network is protected, you have to use end-to-end security. You have to be, you have to encrypt it on systems that you control, that you trust, and decrypt it on systems that your communication partner controls and trusts. Anything else is reliant upon the kindness of strangers. And the internet, the way it was designed, the packets can go pretty much any direction you might think it could possibly go, and it frequently does. Yeah, end-to-end encryption is probably your best bet, as painful as that is.
I don't think there's a security answer. It's not that governments aren't doing something that they should. I'd like to be optimistic about that, but there's no hope for that. But what can governments do? Oddly enough, much the same as the private security consultants. Make it easier to attack someone else than attack you. Make sure that you're doing as good as you can to make it harder to attack. Name registrations in TW should be protected by multi-factor authentication. You shouldn't just have passwords. That's crazy in this day and age. DNSSEC validation should be in all of your DNS infrastructure in this country. You should be running secure, capable resolvers in the DNS and not forcing the DNS traffic to go out of the country. These are basic steps that at least make it easier to attack someone else than attack your national infrastructure. Can't stop the attack, can make it harder to attack inside. You should also encourage the castle builders to come and build castles in here. Because if our real defense right now is to build massive content castles, then build them. Because if that's the best answer we have, encourage it. Don't just decry it, but let it happen. So I think there are measures that government and public infrastructure can do in terms of practices in the namespace, practices in your address space, that put in our best practice with cryptography, multi-factor authentication, those basic things, and get that right. Won't stop the attack, but the attack's going to go elsewhere because it's easier there. That's the best you can hope.
So you mean the drop of the 8.8?
Okay, I am going to be asking our panelists. I know that I would like to leave the last 10 seconds, maybe at the end of the session, to answer one of the comments from our audience that what is the first thing you will do for the security? Okay, so think about that. And we use that as a closing before I get to our perhaps the last question from the open mic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm Inju Chen from Taiwan Institute of Economic Research. I have two questions. So first is, what is the most difficult in your business to promote, to let everyone to understand what you talk about security to your customers? What is the most difficult part? And the second one is when we talk about inclusive in the internet, so we also talk about the affordable equipment to everyone. and especially for the best of the pyramid people. So, but they are also cheap, but sometimes with dangerous and threat. So how to make everyone to use affordable equipment to access the internet? And that's my question. Thank you.
Well, I try to answer first question you raised about what's the most difficult things to communicate with the people about cybersecurity. Actually, I think in cybersecurity committee or the cybersecurity administrator in commercial sector or government agency, it's easy. The most difficult part is how to convince the big boss, okay, the CEO, the government head, because for them, the security is kind of like a burden because there's nothing good for their productivity. Their mindset is always how to grow my revenue, my profit. So security is the last thing they will think about it. But however, the things getting, the situation is changing because at the end, the cyber threat actually will make the productivity come to zero. So this is the timing the high-level people start to think about that. But how to communicate to that kind of people, they don't have any concept about security, even the IT stuff. So how to communicate them is the most difficult. However, I think it's the most important thing we need to do. Okay.
Well, I guess in the interest of time, we can probably have a lot of the discussion off hour, and I just want to say that I love security, and that's why we're here. And why don't we go back to around the table that what do you think is the most important thing or the first thing that you do when you're thinking about security? Dave, you want to give a quick answer?
I guess first thing is just be more aware of the implications of the choices that you're making in terms of the products and services you're buying, more aware of the risks that you have around you, and the ways of mitigating those risks.
Thank you, David. And Bob?
I also think the awareness and also education is the most important, most critical, and the first thing we need to do.
Okay, I know Jeff is going to give a 2-hour answer, but he's going to cut it down to 10 seconds. But I love to hear his answer.
Own the solution in your national community. Everyone is working on this. Google is working on this. Amazon's working on this. They will create outcomes that they own, and you will be a consumer. If that's what you want, do nothing, and that's what's going to happen. The DNS will disappear in behind browsers. Content will disappear in behind Akamai's caches. The internet will be taken off you as a national community. If you don't want that, own the problem yourselves. Mm-hmm. Train, engage, encourage, and act. Someone's going to act, and if you don't, others will, and you'll be treated like a consumer. The choice is yours.
Okay, Yoka?
Well, I would say the collaboration would be the key in security because you cannot really solve a single incident only by yourself since the internet is supported by different stakeholders like domains, IP address, network, everything is combined. So when you're in trouble, you need help from those different stakeholders in order to solve problems. So have a lot of good connection and working relationship with the different stakeholders. Collaboration will be the one of the keys in security, I believe.
Wonderful. I want to thank all the panelists who comes from all different areas, very diversified the answers. I love it. And I love security. So I'm going to give my last comment. I think that Jeff mentioned earlier, security is a luxury word in the past. Probably today still is. But I think what it refers to is that there is a price you have to pay for the security. And that's just the fundamental of it. So thank you very much. I'm sorry I took a lot of your coffee break time. So let this session close at this adjourn. Thank you.
So now it's a coffee break. We'll have a 10-minute coffee break. The next session will begin at 11:23. 下一场会议因为现在会议延误，所以我们待会会延到11:23举行。那请各位，如果背面的您的卡片背面QR code 可以用您的手机扫描之后填答问卷，然后到我们的注册桌这边换取小礼品。